I always think one of the main advantages of taking part in these types of challenges is we encounter these different scenarios or types of analysis. And we get to practice and maybe stretch our knowledge. And it's kind of in a risk-free environment. There's nothing, if you can't do it, okay, that's fine. If you can do it, great, you've learned. But no one's going to be, you're not working to like a work deadline. There's not going to be any consequences if you can't do it. So it's sort of risk-free. You can try. If you do, great. If you don't, okay, you can try again later. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Gerard Duggan. I started learning with Maven, I think, early 2021, and I took a couple of courses in Excel and then Power BI and a little bit in Tableau. And around about that time, I think it's maybe June, July 2021, or was it 2022? The dates get mixed up. I sort of joined Maven on LinkedIn, and I saw that they had these sort of monthly or sort of bi-monthly challenges. And I had sort of observed a few of them in the past. And then I think my first one was the Maven Olympics challenge. So it would have been the time of the Olympics at that time. So I thought after learning Power BI, I thought I would sort of jump in and maybe test it out, see, could I make a dashboard? And that sort of started a long kind of love affair with Maven challenges. So since that time, I'm not sure how many challenges I've joined in. I don't know, this could be 16, 17. And I think I've had, I don't know, maybe 13, 14 finalists as well. So I've been doing it for a couple of years. So I thought today it was a good opportunity to maybe look back on where I started and sort of where I've got to now and how I've sort of developed or progressed in my approach and how I create reports or dashboards using the Maven data sets. So the first one, as I said, was the Olympics entry. As I say, it's good to look back and reflect because it kind of shows how far I've kind of come and developed since then. As I say, this is my first entry. It was probably about a month after completing a few Power BI courses with Parry. So I was still in that kind of learning phase on how to use Power BI and things like that. And I remember looking over the data set. It had, I recall, both the winter and the summer games in it. And I think at the time, there were a couple of people making entries that had both summer and winter games on their visuals and things like that. And it didn't really feel right for me because they're not really comparable. You've got like winter and summer games, the number of participants and all this sort of stuff. They didn't really match. So I thought instead of looking at all the data, maybe focus on the summer games because they're more iconic, they're more global, people are more familiar with them all. And actually then when I started looking at in a bit more detail, I saw there were some interesting trends in sort of female participation. So I thought this might be a good angle to explore. And I think that as a general point, that's good. Sometimes you get a data set and you have all of this information. And some people think, I need to analyze all the information and present all the information. But I think it's a good thing to think that sometimes you don't need to. You can focus in on particular aspects and you'll find that you can create a story or do some type of analysis on a subset of the data set. You don't need to look at everything. I think looking back, I still think it was a good angle to explore, but my execution maybe left a little bit too desired. When I look back at it, there's about 4 or 5 different stories kind of jammed into one page. So I was looking at trends in participation, looking at countries, continents, politics, types of sports, medal counts, top athletes, etc. So there was lots going on, lots of stuff being shown. And although I did have reasons for some of the color choices that I was using, there were multiple different color palettes in there. And there was some type of structure in there in terms of I was grouping certain visuals together, but the combination of those sort of multiple stories, too many colors, lots of different logos and things like that, it made it probably a little bit too busy, too distracting. So I think that's why maybe that one didn't hit it off. But we all have to start somewhere, and I think, like in fairness to myself, maybe it's not like super bad, but if I were to revisit this and maybe look to sort of do it again, I think I might maybe look to focus on one aspect of it. So something like, I think I had something in there about, communist versus non-communist countries. And at the time when I saw it, I thought it was pretty interesting looking at that. And if I was to go back and do this again, maybe I'd drill a little bit more into that story. And as I said, it's a sort of a lesson that I learned, that you don't need to tell all of the stories or show all of the data. Maybe try exploring one aspect and target that to sort of engage the audience and try and, educate them and give them something to think about. I remember when I completed it, and then the finalists came out, and I saw the finalists, and all very good entries. But the one thing I always recommend to people is to watch the judging videos. When I was watching the videos for the Olympics, I sort of picked up these tips about, you got to be answering sort of questions about this. This has to be like a target of what you're trying to communicate. And I kind of learned quite a bit from that. And then subsequently, I would always watch the judging videos, because you always pick up these sort of points that you think, oh, I can bring that into my next sort of challenge. And a lot of people ask me for tips about, how can you improve all this sort of stuff. One of the aspects is, I always say, watch the judging videos. You pick up so many tips. It's like gold. On to my next challenge. So this was the Mexican restaurant challenge, and this was my second one. I was a bit of a surprise because I made the finals on only my second entry. I think I had been learning Tableau at the time. So although I did my first entry in Power BI, I actually did this one in Tableau. And Tableau for a while was my favorite platform for visualizing, but work kind of led me down the path of just using Power BI. But as I said, before taking part of this challenge, I watched the video on the Olympics. And I also went back and watched like previous judging videos as well, just to take in those comments. And some of the sort of common themes were about reports having a good structure, answering sort of certain questions, and being sort of clean, having simple visuals that are easy to understand, and sort of they're appropriate to what they're trying to communicate. So when I was trying to develop an analysis to help select the restaurants, types and locations, I thought I could go back to basics and just answer the typical who, what, where, why type questions. And I thought in terms of the structuring or wireframing of a report, I would separate each of those questions into their own area or own container. And then within each container, you then have a sort of another structure to it. So the far left is a bit of a summary text, then a higher level analysis in the middle, and then on the far right, then you would have like a bit more of a detail or a drill down into the information. So that was kind of the structure. Means it's more familiar for the person who's using it, so they know what they expect as they're reading it. They know sort of what it is, so it's easier to understand. There's no sort of surprises. And I guess again here I had a bit more of a controlled color palette that I selected here, the sort of greens and sort of orange or red. So the questions were answered, I think, and the visuals were kind of clean, simple, not too cluttered. Again, if I was looking back, there might be some minor aesthetic changes. If I look at some of the header fonts and things like that, sometimes some of them are a little bit bigger than the others and things like that, and maybe some of the alignment. But in terms of the analysis that was done, I think it's still pretty good. When I got selected as a finalist, I was pretty surprised, but then when I was watching the judging video, it kind of clicked in my head. It was almost like a bit of a eureka moment where I kind of realized that, yes, this is the type of analysis that you need to do, and it needs to be presented in this kind of a way to create this type of report that people will want to look at, want to consume, and it's a type of report that can potentially make you considered as a finalist. So yeah, that was kind of a key turning point for me, because it kind of made me want to then sort of move on and keep trying to develop and see, can I improve even further in doing the analysis. Yeah. Next came the New York Taxi Challenge. When I look back at it, the taxi challenge, I think most people will agree, it was kind of the equivalent of being thrown in at the deep end of the pool and seeing if you could swim. I think there was like 25 million line items of data for sort of taxi entries or taxi journeys, and the data wasn't clean either. There was some aspects of it that needed adjustment. So there was a like a cleaning list that you guys gave to us. There was stuff to do with calculating taxes, and there was some dates that were the wrong way around, and all this type of stuff. I think a lot of people, or a lot of the community, they were having issues just loading the data onto their machines, never mind, cleaning it or analyzing it or producing some sort of output. And myself included, after a few frustrating tries and a couple of computer crashes, I sort of sat back and tried to think about, well, how can I approach this in a sort of a smarter way to get what we need. So I thought, well, we have these steps of cleaning that are required, and all I want to be able to do is to verify that those steps do what they're supposed to do. Now, if the tax needs to be calculated or dates need to be adjusted, etc. So I thought, instead of applying all these steps to 25 million line items, I take a sample of the data, it's a couple hundred line items, but those line items include the sort of the dirty data, or the stuff that needs to be changed. So if it was taxes that needed to be calculated, or it was dates that needed to be adjusted, some sort of conditional formatting that needed to be done, I would do that in Power Query. So just do the steps on the data, and then I was able, because it's only a few hundred line items, I could then verify that each step was applied and we got the desired result. It was cleaned in that way. And then once that was kind of verified, then I knew that the Power Query steps were hopefully correct, and I could just copy sort of the code for those cleaning steps and then apply it to the 25 million line items. I didn't necessarily need to verify there and then that all the steps were done. It was just an assumption that because it worked on the sample, it should indeed work on the greater set. We could do some verification afterwards. So I did that, and it kind of worked out for me. But I saw that, I say, when you're on LinkedIn, people are asking questions, people are sort of chatting about it, and I saw lots of people were having issues, and it was maybe preventing them from taking part in the challenge. So I thought, well, I could maybe record my process and maybe post it as like a tutorial or like a walkthrough on YouTube. It was the first time I'd ever thought to do anything like that. I've never done anything like that. And I guess it was kind of almost on my own record as well, because there were so many steps in there. These things, if you don't use them, you forget about them, but in the future, you're probably going to need it. So I thought, I'll record it, I'll make a video, and then I can always refer back to it in the future if I need to. And a lot of it was sort of a deep learning curve for me in terms of using Power Query. So yeah, I thought it'd be good to have an easy reference that I could use in the future, and then also for other people, it may help them as well. I wasn't an expert, but I thought I'll at least show what I've done, and people can either tell me, oh, there's a better way to do this or an easier way to do this. You can do it this way, or I can help people. I always think one of the main advantages of taking part in these types of challenges is we encounter these different scenarios or types of analysis, and we get to practice and maybe stretch our knowledge. And it's kind of in a risk-free environment. There's nothing. If you can't do it, okay, that's fine. If you can do it, great, you've learned. But no one's going to be. You're not working to like a work deadline. There's not going to be any consequences if you can't do it. So it's sort of risk-free. You can try. If you do, great. If you don't, okay, you can try again later. So while there was some unique cleaning steps in Power Query, modeling your data, the star schema is, applying some statistical analysis, or experimenting with a visual type. That's what you can do here. And I always try to do something unique in a challenge. For me, taking part in a challenge, if you're just like churning out something that's just you've done before, you're doing it again, it's not really a challenge personally to yourself, really learn anything. So I always try to at least try and bring in something that's new. At least then I can learn myself about something. We did that YouTube video. I got a lot of feedback from people, which sort of inspired me then to sort of push on and create sort of similar videos. And as I say, even though I wasn't an expert, many people were in the same boat. So it was nice to have that feeling that you're able to help people out. The actual report that I created, it might have looked a bit better in my head than what I was able to execute. The intention was to create like this sort of look like a car dashboard of a New York taxi with the street in the background. Like some of the ideas and the visuals are nice, and it did make it to the finals. But I know, again, it's not something you would actually use in a real sort of business environment or in an actual taxi company. So I think if I was doing this again, the end product might be a little bit more business-like or a bit more professional. The reason I enjoyed, or what I got most from this challenge, was in the back end rather than the front end. The front end was kind of secondary. But yeah, no, it was good to get a second final. And I was thinking, I'm on a bit of a roll here. Maybe I kind of hopefully know what I'm doing. And I think then there was a couple more that I started working on. I think there was a Harry Potter and Super Bowl, and maybe the work from home analysis and stuff like that. So I started regularly getting sort of finals. And in my mind, when I look at the challenges, like most of the time when it's finalists, there's 4 or 5 or 6 finalists. And in my mind, like it's kind of difficult or subjective, I think, for the judges to pick like a finalist from it. I'm sure sometimes it might be easy to pick one, but I'm sure sometimes it's difficult. So I always say to people that just getting to the finals is great. Don't worry about whether you win or don't win, or etc. Because I think just getting to the finals, if you're creating that kind of level of challenge entry that gets you to the finals, you're already like doing great. Don't worry about whether you're going to win or don't. But in saying that, I got my first win on the unicorn challenge. There was like a joint win, I think, with 2 others at the time. If you look at, I think, the previous couple of challenges, I think maybe the Super Bowl and the work from home and then the unicorn, I think looking back now, I sort of say, I think I was starting to develop this bit of a style or personal style in terms of the visuals and the structure and the application of sort of supporting text. Because the challenges they were at that time anyway, they were sort of 1-page static reports. I don't know whether you would classify or define them technically as like a dashboard or like a working report. They're somewhere in between like an infographic or like an article on something, or a dashboard is kind of somewhere in between. And it's actually something I like and I enjoy creating. But here in this structure, I wanted to look at 3 aspects, or answer 3 sets of questions. The first was how long it took for unicorns to develop and how many were being created. I think this aspect of the report was something that everyone explored. And I think it was just like a general introduction about what they are and when they were created and how long they took to come around. As I say, nothing too novel there. But when I was doing this analysis, something came across my head, and I added this as like a little thought bubble out on the side about whether you would actually consider a company to be a unicorn if their net value was less than $1 billion. So if they got $2 billion investment and their company was only worth $1.5 billion or $2 billion or something like that, are they really a unicorn? So when I saw this, that sort of gave me the impetus to sort of think, to dig a little deeper and see, like, is this really a thing? So I as I say, I noted that a large number of unicorns had big investments greater than $1 billion. So the next aspect of this was to actually look at whether these companies were providing a real return on investment or a better than average return on investment. Because if I was an investor, that's what I would want to know. It's like which industries or which types of companies that if you put your money into investing, which ones are going to give you the biggest ROI. So I thought about creating a couple of metrics. So calculating whether an industry had valuations greater or less than the average is kind of standard. But I thought maybe I need something more. So decided to calculate the average year-over-year growth. So we took, like, if it was 4 years since it became a unicorn and it was now worth $8 billion. What's the year-over-year growth on that from when it was $1 billion to $8 billion? And then what I thought was probably the key one was this funding to valuation ratio. So it's almost a return on investment ratio. So how much funding you got to how much you're worth at the minute. And so I calculated those metrics and then applied it at a sort of an industry level. So I wanted to see which industries actually perform the best, which ones are consistently performing. And I found that obviously fintech was the top. We had a couple of other industries that were sort of second and third in terms of how much they had, but it was actually the fourth, artificial intelligence, which kind of seems right, especially now a couple of years later that AI has sort of come to the forefront. So those companies are actually the best performing in terms of you're getting the most return on the money that you're putting in. When I look at sort of the way this is kind of visualized, I've done this a couple of times where you have these combined sort of bar charts. So you're reading from left to right. You have one bar chart on the left and it has your categories. And then if you have them then aligned and they're in the correct order going across, you can then have these sort of multiple bars and you don't need to repeat the categories. So you're reducing the noise, you're reducing the ink on your page, etc. It's easier to read. And if you employ these sort of like lines and things they help support, again, it makes it easier to read. So these are kind of techniques that I was kind of learning as I was like learning how to use Power BI and things like that. In the background, then I was also reading books by Alberto Cairo, Stephen Few, Cole, Nussbaumer, Netflix, other people like that, storytelling with that and things like that. So you're picking up these sort of ideas and techniques on how you can effectively communicate data in a better way and make it easier for people to understand. So these are things that I was kind of experimenting with. And I think in this particular challenge, that sort of combined bar chart's probably the best aspect, or my favorite aspect anyway, of it. The others are kind of, okay. And I think the colors, in terms of the colors that are used, are kind of targeted. And then again, we're using these grays that are sort of in the background. You can see what they are, but they're not grabbing attention. They're not grabbing focus. So I think this is giving you a good amount of targeted information without being too overwhelming. So I think it kind of works here. When I was looking through this data, I was seeing that unicorns aren't necessarily like a country level enterprise. Like, they're not state enterprises. These are startups, and these are focused hubs in all these sort of tech cities across the world rather than particular countries. So I think I thought I'll use a heat map to try and sort of show where these type of cities or groups of cities, whether it's the West Coast in the States or somewhere in New York, or the sort of the belt in China and places like that, where you're getting these types of hubs that are creating these unicorns. So I think that plus the supporting table kind of worked well for this one. So I wasn't sure whether this would be a winning entry. Sometimes it's a little bit, it's hard to call, and I think that's why maybe there was 3 joint entries, because it's difficult to the other entries were great, and sometimes it's hard to choose between them. But yeah, no, I was happy to get the first win under the belt on that one. But yeah, I think maybe a little bit on the criticism, maybe the color palette. It might not be to everyone's liking, but that's fine. I think the main thing was the height of the sections. I think I had like the middle section was a bit bigger, and then the top was another size, and the bottom. I think if I was doing this again, maybe I'd have them as being sort of equal. Just the OCD in me kind of thinks that they should be equal. And then even now, when I'm thinking, I look back like at the top left visual, I was trying to like show the increase in the number of unicorns over the year, and then compare that against sort of GDP for the countries. But I think it might have been better if I had shown the federal interest rate, because I think like these unicorns, they were funded by sort of cheap cash or cheap money. So you might be able to see a better sort of analysis if you were seeing what's the interest rate on borrowing money, because people were borrowing money to lend to these guys, and they were getting it for almost 0%. You might see some type of correlation between interest rates and number of unicorns, because I would say now that the interest rates are going up, I'd say there's quite a few less unicorns being created around the world at the minute. But yeah, so next, that was the first one. I think there might have been a couple of entries after that. Maybe I think the airlines challenge and 1 or 2 others. But this is the telecoms churn analysis. This was my second win, and it was a bit of a funny one for me, because I was actually going to skip this challenge, because I think it was July 2 years ago, so July 2022 maybe. I think I flew back home to Ireland from our brother's wedding during this, so a few weeks I was back, and I thought, yeah, I'll just skip this one. I'll catch up with the next one. But then when I flew back to Australia, I had really, really bad jet lag, so I was up in the middle of the night for a couple of days, and I thought, I got nothing else to do. Let's have a look at this data. So there was a lot of data and information and variables to consider on this one. And again, when I looked at it, I thought, there's too much here to consider. But because I only had a short time, I thought, I want to create an end product that's very simple on the front end, just showing almost like a single visual, something like a scatter plot that shows, who's left, who stayed, and then you maybe use that to predict, future customers who may stay or who may leave. So something that was very simple on the front end, even if it was maybe a little bit more complex in the back. So that was kind of my thought in the top of my head. So I even sketched it out, say it's the 4 quadrants, who's going to stay, who's going to leave, who's high value customers, who's not. And I think before I went on holiday, I think I'd taken a few of the machine learning courses with Maven. So I was kind of wondering if I could apply some of those techniques, even if it wasn't strictly speaking machine learning, but some of those sort of normalization techniques, and see if there were sort of common themes associated with whether a customer churned or whether they stayed, and then whether I could use those to predict the likelihood of a new joining customer, whether they were likely to churn or stay based on their characteristics of the contract that they had. And as I say, then plot that on a single visual and just see how it goes. I wrote an extended article on this one about the technique and the steps and all this sort of stuff. But kind of in summary, I created just a series of normalized scores to map the customer value versus their risk to churn, and then plotted individual points for each customer, and then coded them based on whether they churned, stayed, or whether they have stayed, but maybe they're at risk. For the value, I think I was looking at, how much the contract was, how many people they had recommended, and I think their loyalty, so how many months or years they've been with the company. So I take those values and then normalize them. So that would give me one axis. And then on the other, there were variables like, whether you paid by credit card or direct debit or cash, whether you had additional software for security, or you had music and all this sort of stuff applied to it. So in the background, I had all of these tables and analysis sort of showing, what was the impact, the number of people, the percentage of people churning, if they were paying cash, or their contract was month to month, and all this sort of stuff. So it was showing the percentages, but you could, in theory, show 20 or 30 bar charts and line charts, but who wants to look at 20 or 30 bar charts or line charts? It's like your job, I think, again, it's an important point. Your job as an analyst is, yes, you may do all of that analysis, but it's almost like the opposite of being in school doing your maths exam, where they say show you're working. If you're an analyst, it's like, don't show you're working, just show me the answer. So it's kind of what I took away from that. Once I was able to create that sort of quadrant visualization, I think when I saw the results, I was like, yeah, this looks like it's something that we could potentially use. And then I applied it to the newly joined customers to see whether they were at risk or not. And then my idea was just have a single visual, but I thought maybe I need to provide a bit more additional context. So I thought important to highlight the main characteristics of a churning customer. So you got that sort of simple bar chart on the right hand side that shows sort of the top aspects of a churning customer. So that if you're a business owner or you're on a board and you're looking at that, you can see just the top 10 and you can see what's happening there, and you can maybe think about, well, what can I do to try and mitigate these issues to sort of reduce our churn. For me on this one, the need to produce something in a short time sort of made me focus on trying to provide just that sort of one compelling visual. So to say, like sometimes this is good because necessity is the mother of invention. It's like if you've got a short time frame, you need to create something. So it's kind of almost a good exercise as well. It's like sometimes you can take a month to think about this, but if you think to yourself, I've got 2 days, and that's almost like a work. It's almost reflective of a work environment where someone says, I need this by the end of the week, or I need this tomorrow, or 2 days, or whatever. You can jump in and come up with something. If I look back at this, a few things I might change or improve on it. One might be the KPI cards on the left-hand side. I think if I had the new KPI visual or card visual that they have in Power BI, it might have looked a bit better these days. But I think maybe they might be a little bit cluttered or difficult to read. I still think the information in there is quite good and helpful, but maybe I would revisit that and then look to visualize it in a different way. And the other would be to actually train this data in like a machine learning model, like a proper, and see relook at the results and see if they were actually, statistically correct. So yeah, if I'm hoping maybe one day I'll be able to go back on a couple of these challenges and maybe relook at them and do them in this way. But yeah, I was happy with the result when it came out. When I produced this, I wasn't sure whether it was gonna be a winner. I thought maybe it might get finals. But yeah, no, I was really happy when it got finals again, and I think this was solo final win. So it was my first solo final win, shall we say. So next is the space challenge. I think this was highlighted as a little bit experimental, shall I say, from my point of view. As I say, I think I've said before, like every time I do like a challenge, I think, can I do something a little different here? I think for the space one, this one's a little bit left field, but I enjoyed making something that was a little bit different. I remember like opening the data set. I wasn't overly excited with just looking through the data set. I know there was like lots of gaps and stuff in the information and things like that, and I was just wondering, what can I do with this? But again, if I think back to the Olympics data set, maybe slightly similar, I thought there's probably something in there. Again, don't need to look at all the data or all the information. There might be something in there where I could get a story from somewhere. And as I say, they say inspiration can come from anywhere. I like the Beastie Boys. I think back in the day when I was in school and uni, and I think I was like driving, and the song "Intergalactic Planetary" came on the radio, and it kind of, I don't know why, it kind of clicked with me, and I thought the space challenge. I was thinking that those two words, intergalactic and planetary. It's like, oh, maybe I could like do a visual of space missions, ones that went to planets, and those that attempted to go sort of beyond the solar system. And I was thinking, well, that's what, when you're a kid and you think about space travel, that's kind of what you think about. It's like visiting other planets, or going beyond type thing. But the information, the data itself, didn't tell you, where were these missions going, where was their final destination type thing. So I did a bit more sort of research in the background to see, what space missions were visiting, Mars and Jupiter, etc., and then what space missions were going sort of intergalactic. And I got that information, and then I was kind of able to tack it onto the side of the data set that you guys had given me. Yeah, so I sort of decided to go maybe with more of like an infographic type visual, and then obviously then split the visual on the left-hand side, sort of the planetary missions, and then the longer range missions on the right-hand side. So for like the planetary missions, I thought, yeah, we can look at the different countries in the world and how they competed to visit the planets. Although, from the visual itself, you see like the US was head and shoulders above everyone else, but it was interesting to see that other countries are kind of getting in the mix. And then for the sort of the intergalactic type visual, I had in my head, and maybe it didn't come off as well, but in my head, I was thinking of, like, if you ever watch a space rocket launch, you have that sort of visual of it taking off, and you see the trace behind it, and it kind of goes up and then off to the right slightly as it's going into space. And I thought, yeah, I could maybe think about creating some sort of a line chart that sort of looks a little bit like that, and it's kind of, combines the sort of the aesthetic of the trajectory of a rocket with what the data is showing itself. I'd say maybe someone who's better at Photoshop or something like that might have come up with something a bit better. But I think it kind of worked well. I was kind of happy with the way it was showing. And then there's a couple of like smaller things on this. I used the astronomical unit of measurement. That's the distance between the Earth and the Sun. So 1 AU is the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Because again, in data, especially here, you have very large numbers. Like you're talking about kilometers, you're talking about millions and billions of kilometers. Once you start talking about very, very large numbers, they kind of lose meaning. People, the relativity of the numbers are just like lost in people. You say 50 billion kilometers, people are like, I got no idea what that means. 50 billion kilometers. It's like, what is it far? Is it, but I think things like this where you think, oh, I can use astronomical unit, Earth distance between the Earth and the Sun. It's like, okay, that's far away. Something like this makes it more accessible. And then I also used log scales in the charts because of the distances are so huge. So I tried to make it, easier to use. Sometimes it's those sort of small details that kind of, you can create these sort of reports and visuals and things like that. But sometimes it's the grouping of the small aspects that you're kind of considering that kind of make the difference. And then like for bonus points, if anyone noticed, like the font that I used is actually the font that was used on the Beastie Boys album at the time for that song. So again, as I say, little details like that, you bring it in, makes it a little bit more accessible. But yeah, it's a little bit left field, something a bit different. it's not like this type of visual is maybe more suited to something like, you know, Photoshop or Adobe or something like that. It's not really my forte, but I thought, give it a try, see what we can come up with. And I think the information's there. It's a little bit interesting, something that people can sort of look at and maybe learn a little bit about. So yeah, that was good. I think it was another finalist, but yeah, I was definitely not expecting. I don't think I was expecting finalists, and certainly not win. But I thought it's a good entry to put in. The next one is the pizza challenge. Now, although this wasn't a winning entry, this is actually my own personal favorite report that I've created in any challenge. And I think it's certainly the one that got me the most feedback and sort of public engagement. Now, why is it my favorite? Like, in terms of the approach that I made, kind of the alignment with the brief that was requested, the analysis techniques, the insight, story, the sort of hierarchical structure of the report, the layout, the sort of types of visuals and the context provided, and then sort of the application of the sort of Gestalt principles. It was kind of like a culmination of everything I'd kind of learned to date, and it kind of just came together in this analysis that I was kind of, when I created it, I was kind of happy. I was like, yes, this is something I like. And again, I think I could talk about it for an hour in itself, but I'll not bore everyone with it. But I even had there was like a guy I knew on LinkedIn, Carl Seidman. I think he's a bit of a finance guru in the States, and I didn't know who he was at the time, but he approached me and he says, "Can I use this for something?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And then he created a series of the videos on LinkedIn, and it was kind of critiquing the report to say, you know, what was working well, why he likes this style of report, and sort of. So it was, so that like that kind of feedback and stuff was great. But when I look at this report, if I go past, you know, all the sort of the analysis and things like that, for me, kind of the essence of this report kind of came down to empathy. I think empathy is something that people overlook. So especially in something like this, where, you know, you're working on your own, you're not working with a stakeholder per se, etc. I imagined myself as a pizza shop owner. I used to work in pizza shops when I was in school and university and stuff like that. But so it wasn't too difficult to imagine, but I imagined myself as a typical pizza shop owner. So people who I used to work for. And what do I believe that they would want to see as an owner? Yeah. So if I'm the owner, I don't really have time to interpret or analyze, you know, some type of report. I want something that's simple, you know, straightforward, easy to understand, and with real recommendations that I can act upon to kind of improve my business. So my goal in creating this report was to combine the brief requirements with this kind of end goal. So that was always in the back of my mind, was to keep who the report was being used for in the back of your mind. Would this person want to see this information in the report? If it's yes, good. If it's no, then don't do it. So you'll see there's no fancy pictures of pizzas. There's no graphics. There's no nothing like that, because, you know, why would the owner want to see that? They see pizza all day. They don't want to see pizza on your report. Again, when I was sort of wireframing this report, I sort of structuring it to say, right, at the very top, I want a summary that the end user can just read and see, you know, what's in this report. So it's like just a paragraph or two paragraphs to say what's in the report and what am I going to see, so they know what they're going to see, and then the high levels of the metrics as well at the top. Then a series of compartments looking at what the brief requirements were for seating, timing, and inventory. So then when I moved on to each individual compartment, then each individual compartment would have a key recommendation up front. So again, with the owner in the back of my mind, what they want to do when they see it is they say straight away at the top, what's a recommendation? What should I do? And if they're then curious and they want to know why should I be doing this, then they can read on and see how it's supported by the data. So it's like at the top, it might say you need smaller tables or something like that, and they're like, yeah, okay, great. Why would I need smaller tables? And then they go into see why they need them, because their tables are for 4 people, their capacity is being reached based on the number of people coming in and out, etc. And most of the customers are ordering 1 pizza type thing. So that was the reason why I structured it like that. And each visual had a context summary. So again, if you think about an end user, not all end users will be data literate, so to speak. So they'll look at a scatter plot. They might not know what a scatter plot is, never seen one before in your life, or they may have not seen this type of visual before in your life. So I think it was important to provide a little bit of context, a little bit of a description about what the visual is. So at least then, if they don't understand the visual, they have the information. But I think what this does is you read the information, then you look at the visual, and they kind of complement each other. It sort of supports, reinforces the information. So that's why sometimes I like to join both of them. I know some people, they don't like having too much text in their reports, but I think you can find that type of balance. I think here I was able to create that balance. And talking of this one, there was one challenging aspect of the brief here, and I think it was to do with seating capacity that you guys set. And I think a lot of people at the time were wondering, how can I calculate seating capacity? It's based on the information, the sort of data there. It's not intuitive that you can say, yeah, I'll just use these 2 columns and I'll create the seating capacity. So I thought, how could I create some way of estimating how many customers were in the restaurant at one time, and how were they utilizing the seats, and then how could I visualize that? So I got to thinking a little bit how we could do this. So I made just some reasonable assumptions, because you don't have the end user. You can't ask them, how long do people spend in your restaurant, or typically how many people would eat an extra large pizza, this type of stuff. So I had to make some sort of reasonable assumptions. Again, if you have an end user, you could confirm it with them, or you could see whether they're reasonable or not. So we had those to sort of make an assumption about how long someone would spend in a restaurant. If they made an order of 3 pizzas, how many people would that? Is that 3 medium pizzas? Is that 3 people? And then if 3 people are sitting at a table with 4 chairs at it, they're occupying those 4 chairs. Someone else who comes in the restaurant and orders 1 pizza, they're not going to sit beside them. They're going to sit at a different table, because that's the way people are. So yeah, I built this sort of logic to it, so that each day I could calculate from when the restaurant opened, how many people were coming in and how many people were leaving based on the time of day. So I created like this running total each day of the number of people in the restaurant at any one time. Again, I made a video on how to do that calculation in Power Query. And it's a technique I think I've used several times, and I know lots of other people kind of used it. But I think that was the key technical aspect of this report. Everything else was kind of, I wouldn't say very standard, but it was fairly standard. There was nothing overly complex about the analysis. But yeah, no, that was one that I enjoyed doing, and enjoyed sort of solving that puzzle. Yeah, so it was good. So I was really happy with the analysis that was done with this. And then again, I was happy with the aesthetics of the report. Consistent alignments of how everything's sort of put on the page. The use of white space or gaps between visuals or between compartments, I think is quite good here. The targeted use just of the 2 colors, the sort of the red and the green, and then the sort of the shades of gray to use that. So again, as I say, sort of a culmination of learning through various Maven courses, and then also sort of side reading from some other sort of data visualization experts in the field. Sort of brought me to this point of creating this. So as I say, there wasn't a winner, but it's still my favorite to date on any sort of challenge that I've created. So this is the Apple Environmental Challenge. This was my third one. And this is, the Triple Crown panel that came with this. I think I actually got this. I'm wearing especially the t-shirt that I got for this challenge on my back. This is my most recent entry. When I saw the Apple entry, I thought, I'll have a go at this, because I kind of do a little bit of work with sort of environmental data and sort of companies that are working towards net zero and things like that. So I thought this will be a good experience to look at this and see if there's anything that I can take and apply it to my own work. My approach to this was, as always, sort of based on the brief. So it called for visualizing the progress to net zero in 2030. And I thought, just based on the data, there are two portions to that. So it's the way I split this report up. Kind of what's occurred to date. So between whatever the date was, 2012 or 2015 and 2022, and then predicting what's going to happen in the future. So as I say, the report's kind of split into two. The top part of the report is 7 years progress. And then the bottom part is then trying to forecast out to 2030. The other part of the brief was that you needed to be like an independent journalist. So in my mind, this shouldn't be some sort of like a fluff piece or promotional material for Apple, where they're saying how great they are in terms of they're going to reach net zero and, we're this fantastic company and you should all love us. I thought I should at least dig and see, what are the real underlying trends, and are there any issues that you see with these trends that may impact whether they're going to achieve it and how they're going to achieve it. In terms of like the styling of the report, again, it's probably quite similar to my past work, but similar to maybe the churn analysis and the pizza analysis, I wanted to condense the key points into just a few visuals. So I didn't want this massive report of multiple visuals that people are having to scroll up and down, etc. And something that was easy to look at, easy to read and digest. And I think that those points came across if you watched the challenge video, and when it was being reviewed, I think it was the comment that it was kind of like, it's a single page. You don't need to scroll up or scroll down. It's there on the page, and it's just one or two visuals. And it might not look much, look sparse on the page, but if you actually look at it and read it, it's like there's actually quite a lot of information. There's layered information in there. My main focus was on how Apple were reducing their emissions. For me, again, there was another sort of other two aspects of this was like how they're reducing their emissions, and then also the carbon offsets. I know some people made the point about they need to ramp up their carbon offsets, all this sort of stuff. But for me, it's a little bit of a red herring. I didn't put it in the report, but in theory, Apple could go out on the 31st of December 2029 and buy 9.6 million tons of carbon emissions offsets, and as long as they've reduced their outgoing emissions, they could buy that and meet their target, and done. They paid for it once. So it's not something that you need to build up necessarily, where you need to be increasing year on year. It's kind of one of those things that's it's, as I say, a little bit of a red herring. And you'll see from the trends, they only really use them to achieve corporate net zero to date, rather than anything about overall net zero. So it was to meet sort of intermediate targets, and they'll continue to spend or have these carbon offsets to achieve the corporate net zero. So they'll consistently be corporate net zero from now until 2030. So I kind of not ignored, but I didn't put too much focus on that. And you note that also when we talk about the carbon offsets, we're talking about whatever the term is, millions of tons per annum of carbon emission, blah, blah, blah. It's this long term that people won't understand what it is. It's like, what is that? What does it mean? So I think at the top of my report, I give like a bit of a definition of what it is, and relatively speaking, how many trees or whatever it is. So it gives people an idea in their mind about what it is they're thinking about, because the numbers 9.6, like, it doesn't really mean a whole lot, but when you consider it in context of what one is, etc., you think like this is actually like a big deal or a big number. So I wanted to see where the cuts were coming from and where the trends were. And as you see from the visuals, the cuts today were overwhelmingly coming from the manufacturing process. And they're massive cuts, like if you look at it relatively speaking. So when I saw that, it kind of raised like an alarm in my head. But I was skeptical about whether it was reasonable to expect like a linear. Some people were predicting this sort of linear trend of reduction in the manufacturing process out to 2030. And again, anyone who's worked in engineering, manufacturing, etc., typically you go by the 80-20 rule. So it's kind of like 80% of your cuts may only take 20% of the effort up front to achieve. So you'll get those big wins up front and you'll take them. But then drawing out that final 20% or whatever it is that they need to draw out, it then requires 80% of the effort to get those finals. So it becomes more difficult as you get along. So that was my kind of open question on this report was, can they maintain this going forward? Because all the other aspects were either, some of them were increasing and others were sort of flatlining. So they were primarily relying or focusing just on reducing the manufacturing process. So that was kind of my journalistic slant on it, trying to find that underlying issue about why maybe they couldn't. So that's kind of what I did there. As I say, the visuals were kind of simple but layered. Like on the top one, the 7 years of progress, where we have this sort of like a line chart that's showing the reduction and the increase on offsets. It's just a line chart if you think about it. But if we have then like the target reduction rate, actuals, targets and actuals, and then we have these sort of lines that are sort of giving a little bit of text to give context about what does this actually mean? What's the overall 2030? Are we on the right path, etc. You got these layers on the visual that sort of engage the user. They read them, they get a bit more context. It gives you a lot more information than just a simple line chart. And similarly on the one on the bottom, where we have these sort of the simple visual in terms of slope chart, it's just a straight line. But then in the background, you've got this sort of underlying trend where it's sort of going down and up a little bit over the years, with sort of the context of the bars on the side and stuff. So again, it's sort of single visuals, but with layered information. You can get the high level just by looking at it. But if you want to dig a little bit deeper, you don't need to look at another visual. You can look at the same visual, but just look at a little bit more information. So that's what I was trying to do here. So it ends up that we just have a line chart, 2 sets of slope charts, and a couple of cards. And again, I didn't want to be too downbeat on Apple because obviously they're one of the biggest companies in the world. They kind of know what they're doing. So I was kind of impressed that even though I may be skeptical about them reaching net zero by 2030, because I think it will be difficult, they've actually managed to have great progress to date, plus grow their company like exponentially. So it's like not many. you gotta take your hat off to them for doing that. You can't be too down on them. At least they're making the effort and they're kind of getting on board. So yeah, no, I enjoyed the the analysis of this one. I thought there's good information, good questions came out of it, and yeah, I hope this or these insights into where I've come from the original Olympics, just finishing a course or two on Maven, jumping in at the deep end, and then using that development, learning lessons from you guys through your judging videos, listening to podcasts on data visualization, data analysis on the side, reading books, taking a couple more courses. But more importantly, I think just actually getting in there and practicing, learning from other people. There's lots of other people who sort of regularly contribute, produce great work, and just looking at what they're producing, you can get ideas from other people. I forget who it is who says you steal like an artist. I think some people get annoyed that they think, oh, people are stealing my ideas and things like that. But in reality, it's everyone can have the different ideas. It's different if it's literally copy paste. But if someone's getting inspiration and they think, oh, that's a good way to visualize it, I'll try that, apply that here. I think you should take it almost as a compliment that people think the way you've done it is it's a nice way to visualize it. Or my recommendation is just join in, learn from the other people, get inspiration, and see where you get over the course 4 or 5 challenges. Don't get disheartened on your first challenge if you enter it and you don't make finals, or you don't get too many likes or whatever it is. Just do your first challenge, review it, see if there's lessons learned, what can you learn from people who are maybe getting finals or etc. On the next one, see if you can apply 1 or 2 of those aspects of how you structure it, or the type of analysis you're doing. You don't need to be producing stunning visuals or anything like that. Just if you get the structure and the analysis right, everything else will come in time. I hope this was informative. It was good to look back and see where I've come from.